You ever hear a sound that sticks in your bones? Not a scream, not an explosion. I'm talking about the click. That dry, hollow click that meant your guns had jammed at 12,000 feet, with 3 zeros tearing in from your 6, and nothing but ocean below. That click meant death. And it had killed more than a few of my buddies by the spring of '44. We were flying Hellcats off the USS Enterprise, part of Task Force 58 hammering the Marianas. The Navy had finally gotten wise. No more Wildcats getting shredded by nimble Zeros. The F-6F was a beast, 2,000 horsepower, 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns, and the kind of rugged design that let you land with half a wing missing and still walk away. But those guns, God help us, they'd still jam. Not all the time, just enough to make your blood run cold. Sometimes the oil would freeze at high altitudes. Other times the links would misfeed or crack under vibration. You'd be pulling lead on a Zero, have him dead to rights, finger on the trigger, and then, click. I saw it happen to Tommy Rodriguez over truck. We were chasing a trio of fighters running for the clouds. Tommy dove hard, came in from high port, perfect angle, but when he squeezed, nothing. The Zero looped, reversed, and shredded his tail. Tommy's Hellcat rolled twice, clipped a wingtip on the ocean, and vanished in spray. We found part of his canopy 2 days later. We blamed the guns. We cursed the armorers. But truth be told, no one had a real fix. The planes were new. The theaters were brutal. And high-altitude gunfights weren't exactly a routine part of gunnery school back in Pensacola. Then came Chief Petty Officer Walt McKinley. Nobody really knew where McKinley came from. Some said he was a Detroit grease monkey before the war. Others claimed he used to work for General Motors on prototype tank engines. What we knew for sure was this: he had grease under his nails, permanent oil stains on his dungarees, and he hated paperwork more than kamikazes. He showed up on the Enterprise sometime after Saipan, transferred in from a repair depot on Guam, looked around the gun bay with this sour look, like someone had farted in church. "This is a damn joke," he muttered the first day. "No wonder your guns jam." That caught some flack. A few of our senior mechanics bristled. Hell, I bristled. But Walt didn't care. He started pulling down the .50 cals from the wings himself, laying them out on the bench one by one, checking every spring, every feed guide, every lubrication point. He wasn't just inspecting. He was measuring, timing, tracking the rate of movement in the bolt cycle, how the ammo belt flexed under G-loads. He took film footage of the feeds during takeoff, even asked to ride in the rear cockpit of a recon bird with a stripped-down Browning firing test rounds at 15,000 feet. "Only way to know," he said, "is to watch it break." He didn't report to anyone. He just kept working and mumbling, talking to himself in the gun bays late at night, surrounded by spent casings and grease rags. Then one day, he walked into the ready room holding a tiny, hand-machined aluminum bracket. Looked like nothing. Size of a dog tag. Cost him about $5 in raw scrap and time from the lathe in the back of the hangar. "This," he said, holding it up between 2 fingers, "is gonna stop the jams." Everyone laughed, some outright, others politely turned away. I remember Lieutenant Hutchinson, Hammer Hutch, to everyone who knew his temper, giving McKinley a half-smile. "You gonna fix $1 million warbird with $5 and a prayer, Chief?" Walt didn't blink. "Gonna fix what none of you figured out in 6 months. And you know what he did. Walt McKinley's little $5 fix wasn't some magic gadget. It was a feed bracket. Just a tiny realignment piece, bolted between the ammo tray and the first guide rail that fed the .50 cal rounds into the gun. He called it the stagger shim. Said the issue wasn't the gun, wasn't the ammo, wasn't even the lubrication half the time. It was timing. The feed angle changes under stress, he explained, hunched over a chalkboard in the maintenance bay like some half-mad professor. When a Hellcat pulls negative G in a dive, the ammo belt sags just enough to change the entry geometry. One link gets caught. The bolt skips. The round gets chewed. Jam. He slapped the chalk down like a gavel. You don't need a new gun. You need the round to come in half a degree higher. No one believed him. But Hutch let him install it on one bird, just one, mine. I didn't ask why. I think Hutch figured I'd be the least likely to complain if something went wrong. I'd flown more missions than most, and I kept my mouth shut in briefings. My Hellcat, Thunderbug, was the test mule. McKinley installed the bracket himself, hands working fast, precise, like a man who'd done this 100 times in his head before ever touching metal. Took him under 30 minutes. Didn't tell me to baby it, didn't ask me to log results, just said, use it like you normally would. Next morning, we hit a Japanese radar station on Rota. 10 Hellcats, 6 Dauntlesses, 4 Avengers, and a pair of Corsairs from another deck group. We launched just after sunrise, engines howling in unison as we tore off the Enterprise's deck in staggered pairs. I wasn't thinking about McKinley's bracket as we climbed. Not until the first bogies showed up. Radar called them in at Angels 15, a loose screen of Oscars, light, fast, and still dangerous in the hands of experienced pilots. Our Dauntlesses tightened formation. The Corsairs peeled off high. We stayed with the bombers. That's when I saw one break off and head straight for the tail of the lead Avenger. I punched throttle and climbed. The Hellcat growled beneath me, that Pratt & Whitney R2800 singing its song of war. The Zero, or Oscar, who could tell in that chaos, banked hard to evade, but I had position. I lined up, close to 400 yards. My reticle glowed red over his canopy. I squeezed the trigger. 6.50 cals roared to life. Not 4, not 2. All 6. And they didn't stop. The slugs tore through the sky like angry gods, tracers streaking like comets. I walked them up the fighter's tail, across the fuselage, and into the engine cowling. The whole bird blew apart like wet paper. I pulled up, turned to check my 6, expecting the usual click or sputter. Nothing. Just the sweet rumble of victory, and the even rhythm of feed belt cycling. No jams. Not one. Over the next 10 minutes I got 2 more, both clean kills, both without a single stoppage. By the time we landed, I was shaking. Not from fear. From disbelief. I taxied Thunderbug back to her spot on the deck and shut her down. McKinley was already there, arms crossed, waiting. I popped the canopy and looked down at him. They all fired, I said. All 6, no skips, no jams. Walt just nodded once. Then turned and walked away. Didn't even smile. What happened next spread like wildfire. Within 48 hours, 3 more Hellcats were flying with the stagger shim. Then 5, then 20. McKinley didn't stop at Hellcats. He adjusted the bracket design for Corsairs, for Avengers, even retrofitted a few Dauntlesses. He refined it, changed the angle by 0.4 degrees, cut a new version out of aircraft-grade aluminum, drilled stress relief grooves along the sides to reduce warping at high G loads. Cost stayed the same. $5. Within a week, jam rates across the wing dropped by 80%. Pilots who'd stopped trusting their guns now opened fire with confidence. McKinley became a ghost legend overnight. You'd see him in the shadows of the hangar deck, muttering to himself, scribbling notes, surrounded by broken gun parts and a steaming mug of black coffee that never seemed to leave his hand. He didn't want credit. Didn't want a medal. Didn't even want a commendation. Fix the damn planes. That's the job, he said when the XO tried to write him up for a Navy Commendation Medal. We joked about him behind his back, called him the $5 savior, said he could fix a torpedo with a coat hanger and some gum if you gave him 5 minutes and a flashlight. But under the jokes was reverence, real respect. Because every pilot knew that bracket was the reason they came home some days. And then came the mission over Tinian. That one changed everything. The brass called it a precision strike. Hit the airfields at Tinian before they could scramble interceptors. We were to take off pre-dawn, fly low, fast, and hard. I led Blue Flight, 5 Hellcats, all equipped with McKinley's brackets. We hit the coast just as the sun crested the horizon. Golden light painted the palm trees. AA fire erupted from the hills. Tracers lit the sky like angry fireflies. A formation of Oscars rose from the east runway. We dove. I heard someone scream on the radio, couldn't tell who. I lined up a target, fired. The slugs ripped through his wing and sent him spiraling into the jungle. More came, too many. We danced through the flak, slamming throttle, banking, diving. I caught 2 more kills, clean bursts, no jams. Then I saw Hutchinson go down. 1 minute he was on my wing, the next a black smear in the sea. The moment seared into my memory. I got 3 more that day. By the time we returned to the Enterprise, our squadron had lost 4 birds. But that number would have been 8, at least, if the guns hadn't worked. Later that night, I found McKinley sitting alone under the wing of an Avenger. No tools, no clipboard, just him and the night. "You know," I said, "you probably saved my life today." He didn't look up, just stared out at the dark ocean. "Wasn't me," he muttered. "Was the medal. I just listened." I didn't understand it then. But I would. Because 3 weeks later, Walt McKinley disappeared. No goodbye, no orders, no announcement. One day, Chief Petty Officer Walt McKinley was there, double-checking a Browning receiver under a red work lamp. The next, he was gone. We thought he'd been reassigned, maybe rotated back to Pearl or sent to another carrier in the task force, but there were no records, no transfer orders. No one in the command chain had anything on paper. Even the XO was confused. "Log says he's still on board," he told us, "but the bunk's empty, locker cleaned out, tools gone." Vanished like smoke. Only thing he left behind was a small canvas satchel tucked under a bench in the maintenance bay. Inside were 5 freshly machined brackets, a stack of hand-sketched diagrams, and a note scribbled in thick pencil on the back of a requisition form. It read, "You're gonna need these when they go back to belt feed Mark IV. The tolerance drifts too wide on the port side. Keep the belts warm, clean the latches every 20. The gun's not your weapon, the cycle is. WM." That was it. No flair, no signature, just WM. We didn't know it at the time, but McKinley's bracket was about to go from an unofficial fix to a fleet-wide standard. Because what happened next sent shockwaves from our little corner of the Pacific all the way to the offices of Naval Aviation Command in Washington. It happened at Peleliu. We were assigned air cover for the beachhead landings. September 44. The Marines were going ashore in the brutal heat. Coral sand, shrapnel in every grain. Japanese bunkers cut into rock like termites. The invasion was a nightmare. Our job was to keep the skies clear and hammer any enemy reinforcements trying to move through the interior. It was on the 3rd day, blazing sun overhead, waves of smoke curling from the ridges, that we ran into the ambush. We'd been escorting a flight of Avengers returning from a bombing run inland. I was flying wing with Lieutenant Stu, hardened, green but sharp. We had 4 Hellcats in all, plus 2 Corsairs covering high. Everything looked clean until we passed over a narrow valley. That's when the sky lit up. 4 Japanese fighters dropped from cloud cover at full throttle, probably flown out of Babel Diab and redirected midair, caught us completely off guard. They had height, speed, and position. In under 10 seconds, one of our Corsairs took a round through the wing root and spiraled out. The Avengers broke formation, scattered like geese. I kicked the Hellcat into a climbing turn and went inverted. Hardin tried to follow but got jumped. Took fire through his canopy, bird smoking, peeling down in a flat spin. But right then I heard it. Not a click. Not a jam. A roar. All 6 of my Brownings lit up, the Hellcat vibrating with controlled fury. I rolled into a burst, tracked across a Zero's flight path and shredded his fuselage. Wing came clean off. Another tried to pull vertical, bad move. I stayed level and walked fire right into his engine cowling. Flames blew back over his canopy. Our guys fought like devils. Not a single jam. Not one. I saw Lieutenant Dukes, Morrison pull a high-speed scissor maneuver and get 2 with a single burst. And all across the engagement, every bird equipped with McKinley's bracket kept firing without fail. By the time we limped back to the Enterprise, the deck crew could hardly believe it. 8 kills, 0 mechanical failures. Not a single .50 cal stoppage across 3,000 rounds fired. We submitted the after-action report like always. But this time, someone read it. 2 days later, a Navy staffer arrived by seaplane. Said he was with Bu Ord Bureau of Ordnance. He wasn't in uniform. Just a khaki jumpsuit, clipboard in hand, hair slicked back like a Wall Street banker. Started asking questions about the brackets, about McKinley. Who authorized the modification? Are these specs standardized? Is there metallurgical data on the stress tolerances? He was sweating the whole time, not from the heat. He was nervous, like someone had told him to find a ghost, and now he realized the ghost had already changed the war. We showed him the satchel, the diagrams, the bracket itself. He didn't speak for a long time, just ran his finger along the edges, lips moving slightly as he calculated something in his head. Then he said, "We'll be taking this, chain of command issue." Tried to confiscate it right then and there. But the XO stopped him. "This is field proven," he said. "Pilots are coming back alive because of this." The staffer frowned. "It hasn't been tested to standard." The XO folded his arms. "We are the standard." It turned into a standoff. And then something strange happened. The staffer sat down, right there in the maintenance bay under the wing of a Corsair. And he whispered, "Do you know who McKinley was?" We didn't answer, we didn't know. He looked around like he wasn't supposed to say what came next. "Before the war," he said, "McKinley worked in a classified program at Aberdeen Proving Ground, ballistics testing, feed cycle stress studies. He wrote 3 of the manuals we use for gunnery inspection, only they're all under internal code. The guy's a ghost on paper." "Why'd he end up on our ship?" someone asked. "Because someone up top screwed up," the staffer said. "They misrouted a transfer order. He was supposed to go to the Naval Air Factory in Philly. Instead, they sent him to Guam. By the time they caught it, he'd already fixed a systemic flaw in half the fleet's aircraft." "Why not just reassign him back?" I asked. He shook his head. "Because when Washington found out he'd made unauthorized modifications in theater, he was scrubbed, off the books. We think he went AWOL before they could pull him in." We all stood there in stunned silence. "Your Chief McKinley," the staffer continued, "just saved more pilots than most squadrons ever fielded, and now no one can find him." Word started to spread. First it was just whispers, then full briefing notes started referencing the stagger shim. By October, official tech bulletins were going out under the radar. Field Note 17C. Unauthorized feed stabilization, Brackets observed to reduce jamming in theater trials. Maintain temporary authorization under code discretion until further evaluation. That was the Navy's way of saying, keep using it but don't quote us. It didn't stop there. Other carriers began machining their own. Crews traded notes across deck groups. Some pilots started etching WM into the sides of their receiver housings for luck. But no one ever saw Walt McKinley again. Not in Pearl, not in the Philippines, not even in the bars of San Diego, where every Navy mechanic went to disappear at least once. He was gone. And yet everywhere. Every time we squeezed the trigger and the guns didn't jam, he was there. Every kill shot that wasn't interrupted by a mechanical failure, that was Walt. And as the war pushed into 45, toward Iwo, toward Okinawa, toward the final push, his $5 bracket became the quiet hero of the skies. A tiny, forgotten piece of metal that turned silence into gunfire and clicks into kills. The last time I saw Walt McKinley, really saw him, was months before he vanished. He was sitting cross-legged on the flight deck just after sundown, leaning against the tail wheel of a wrecked Avenger they dragged from the crash net. He had a busted-up Browning disassembled across his lap, the parts laid out on a canvas mat like some kind of shrine. I remember asking him why he was still working that late. He didn't even look up. Because some kid tomorrow is gonna pull this trigger at 15,000 feet, he said, and I'm not gonna be the reason it doesn't fire. That sentence stuck with me. Because by the spring of 45, those kids were all over the fleet. Fresh out of OCS, barely 200 hours in their logbooks, being thrown straight into the most brutal air war the Navy had ever fought. Kamikazes, interlocking flak curtains, Zeros desperate for one last glory kill before Japan collapsed. And McKinley's bracket, the stagger shim, was now as common as the guns themselves. Unofficially, of course. Officially, it was still a gray zone modification, but no one cared anymore. The brass had stopped asking questions. Field commanders had stopped filing reports. The only thing that mattered was this: the guns fired when you needed them. That made all the difference during Operation Iceberg. Okinawa was hell. Worse than Tarawa, worse than Peleliu, worse than any of us expected. We were flying off the USS Randolph by then, rotated from Enterprise. New ship, same sky. And now the Japanese were throwing everything they had at us. Kikusui waves, organized mass kamikaze attacks, slammed into the fleet like hammers. Destroyers burning stem to stern. Carriers listing with decks torn open. Entire squadrons wiped out in single sorties. We flew every day, sometimes twice. We didn't even count the missions anymore, just the losses. And the worst were the intercepts. Picture this: 15 Val dive bombers loaded with 500-pounders coming straight at a task group. Altitude 2,000, speed 200 knots. Your job: kill every last one before they get within drop range. You have 90 seconds from visual contact to weapons range. That's 90 seconds to get eyes on, radio the bearing, throttle up, climb into intercept angle and open fire. You do not have time for a jam. That became the mantra. No time for a jam. I remember one intercept in particular. April 16, 1945. We were scrambled from Randolph with minimal warning. A picket destroyer 40 miles out had picked up inbound radar contacts, fast, low, and plenty of them. I was in Thunderbug, now a patchwork bird with nearly 100 bullet holes across her skin, but still purring like a tiger thanks to our crew chief, Stokes. The stagger shim was on its third iteration by then, smaller, stronger, lighter. Precision cut from surplus P-51 wing ribs, believe it or not. We climbed fast and hit the valves head-on. There must have been 20. I dove straight through their formation, guns blazing, sawed one in half from nose to tail, pulled hard left, rolled inverted, came back into the fight from their rear quarter. The sky became a grinder. Shells zipped past the canopy. One exploded so close it cracked the instrument glass. The smell of ozone and smoke filled the cockpit, but the guns, they kept firing. That rhythm, thump 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 thump, was like a heartbeat. No misfeeds, no skips. Just pure mechanical defiance. We took down 14 of them before they reached the task force. 4 got through, 2 hit destroyers, 1 hit an ammo ship and turned her into a floating fireball. But if our guns had jammed even once, if even one bird lost their firepower, that number would have been doubled. Tripled. And the deck crews knew it. After we landed, I remember walking back across the deck and locking eyes with a mechanic. Kid couldn't have been more than 19. He looked at the soot on my face, the holes in the fuselage, and then he pointed to the side of the gun housing. 3 letters were etched there in grease pencil. WM. By the end of May, McKinley's name had become legend. Not official, never in the communiques, but whispered everywhere. You'd hear it in briefings. Guns working good, they better be, WM's watching. Or in hangars. Ship in from Saipan said their new brackets cracked, but they didn't do it the way Walt showed. There were copies of his diagrams floating all over the fleet now. Grainy mimeographs passed hand to hand like contraband. Some versions had added notes. Others had full checklists for installing them in under 10 minutes. I even saw a pin-up calendar where someone had drawn Walt's face onto the body of a Navy pin-up girl, complete with a torque wrench and the words, $5 Savior under it. He'd become a myth. And the best part, nobody tried to take credit. No admiral, no officer, not even Boo Ord. Because they knew, everyone knew. They'd tried their fancy labs and their inspection protocols and their $1,000 solutions. And none of it had worked. Not like a $5 bracket made by a man with black coffee, dirty nails, and no time for ceremony. The last letter I ever got during the war came from an ensign stationed on the USS Bunker Hill. He was a gunner's mate, young, eager, and had heard through the grapevine that our squadron had been one of the first to use McKinley's bracket. Here's what he wrote. Sir, I heard you flew with the original shims installed. We've got 2 birds here jamming every 3rd burst and no idea why. We tried the Boo Ord fix and it only made it worse. Any chance you've still got the original specs? One of our mechs said he heard Walt used to cut a micronotch in the upper feed claw to prevent slippage, but we're scared to make a cut without knowing the angle. Also, do you know where he went? Some of us think he's still out there. ENS, Jonathan J. Larks. USS Bunker Hill, Air Group 84. I never replied. Not because I didn't want to, but because by the time the letter arrived, Bunker Hill had already been hit. May 11, 1945. 2 kamikazes struck her within 30 seconds of each other. Nearly 400 killed. Dozens of aircraft destroyed on deck. I never found out what happened to Ensign Larks, but I remember reading that her pilots returned fire during the attack. And not a single one reported a jam. That was Walt. Gone without a trace. But in every sky we flew, he was there. Not in the headlines, not in the medals, but in the rhythm of the guns. In the silence that didn't come when your life depended on it. And long after the war ended, after the brass retired and the carriers were scrapped and the Hellcats were sold for scrap, there were still a few of us, old pilots and deck crew alike, who knew that $5 of scrap metal and one stubborn, grease-covered genius had saved more lives than we'd ever be able to count. The war ended like a light switch. August 1945. One day we were prepping for the full invasion of Japan, Operation Downfall, they called it. We'd all read the casualty estimates. 500,000 Allied dead, maybe more. Then came Hiroshima. Then Nagasaki. Then silence. The empire surrendered, just like that. And the war that had consumed every waking moment of our lives was suddenly over. But if you think that meant we celebrated, popping champagne, dancing on decks, kissing nurses on piers, you'd be wrong. At least for me. I sat in the empty hangar bay of the USS Randolph that night, watching a lone maintenance man mop oil off the steel floor. The silence felt heavier than any battle. I thought of every man who hadn't made it back. Tommy Rodriguez, Lieutenant Hutchinson, Stu Hardin, so many others, and not one of them had ever heard of Walt McKinley. He never got a medal. Never got his name in the papers. Never stood in front of a flag and received a folded one in return. But I'm telling you now, if even half of our pilots made it home because their guns didn't jam in a critical moment, then Walt McKinley deserved more than any admiral or general or politician ever got. He deserved legacy. A few months after VJ Day, I went back to civilian life. Got married, bought a small house in Sacramento, tried my hand at sales, then crop dusting, then teaching flight school to eager teenagers with dreams of flying jets instead of propellers. Thunderbug was gone, scrapped in some Pacific Island yard alongside the others. The war was over, but the ghosts were not. And McKinley, he stayed in the back of my mind like an unfinished sentence. So I started looking. Not obsessively, not at first, just the occasional phone call, a letter here or there. I knew he'd never given his full name, but I figured a guy like that must have left a footprint somewhere. Aberdeen Proving Ground, General Motors, Pearl Harbor. Every lead turned up nothing. He was a phantom. Then one day in 1948, I got a postcard in the mail. No return address. No name. Just a black and white photo of an old hangar in El Centro, California. And written on the back, in the same all-capital pencil strokes I remembered from that maintenance bay note, were 4 words. Keep your belts warm. That was it. No signature, no explanation. But I knew. I knew. I drove to El Centro the next day. Desert heat poured off the pavement like waves. The old hangar was still there, cracked roof, rusted doors, crows perched like sentries on the rafters. Inside, I found an old flight instructor teaching crop duster maintenance to 2 teenagers. I waited until he finished. Then asked, "You ever hear of a guy named McKinley, worked on Brownings, made a feed bracket, called it the Stagger Shim?" The instructor looked at me for a long moment. Then he pointed to a framed photo on the wall. It showed a man in greasy coveralls, holding up a mangled .50 cal receiver and smiling like he just told God how to fix his own machines. No nameplate. No award. Just him, Walt. The instructor said he used to come through here, never stayed long, showed us a few things, fixed a few birds, said the war never ended, it just changed uniforms. I asked where he went. The instructor shrugged. Said he was chasing the next flaw, said everything breaks eventually, even peace. Years passed. Then decades. Wars came and went, Korea, Vietnam, Gulf. Jets replaced propellers, missiles replaced guns, but even then in some places, some aircraft, those old M2 Brownings still flew. And every time I saw one, every time I heard that distinctive thump-thump-thump of a .50 cal firing in sync, I thought of Walt. I thought of that night in the maintenance bay, his hands blackened with grease, his voice calm as stone as he muttered about angles and feed cycles like a surgeon giving last rites. And I wondered, how many lives did he save? 100, 1,000, more? We'll never know. Because no one wrote it down. No one official anyway. But if you've made it this far, now you know. You know that buried in the belly of every surviving Hellcat, etched into the memory of every mechanic who kept his pilot alive, and whispered into the wind with every burst of Browning gunfire, was the legacy of a man who didn't ask for credit, didn't wait for orders, didn't care about anything but making sure that when a pilot pulled the trigger, the damn gun fired. Somewhere out there, maybe in a forgotten workshop in Arizona or a small-town airport in Kansas, there's a box of old parts. Dusty. Rusting. Inside it might be one last stagger shim. One last piece of Walt McKinley's genius. It won't look like much. Just a bent sliver of aluminum. But if you hold it up to the light, if you squint just right and tilt your head, you might see it. A whisper of firepower. A silhouette of a Hellcat banking through clouds. A man in coveralls, mug in hand, watching from the shadows of history. Because sometimes heroes don't fly the planes. They fix the part that makes the bullet leave the barrel. And they do it for $5.